have some reports this evening. The first one concerning a legislative update, because you know it's that time of year. The other year. Carla, do you have anything that you'd like to say to introduce this, and then I'll add some comments and open it also to the board to add.
Sure.
Any comments?
Just something very quickly. We continue to update the document that should be in your packet regarding bills that are in play, their status. And again, I will say the BOIs, the bills of interest, continue to grow a little bit, but I will say reading each one of those, and you know how the vast number of bills that there are, some I just can't help but put on there. But whether they do or don't fall within our legislative priorities, I've tried to keep that on top. But then some other items I just thought were of interest. So I'll leave that to the board's discretion, however you'd like to.
Okay. Thank you. So this session there have been over 2,000 bills related to education filed. And a filing period has ended, so that number is not going to grow. So what I'd like to do at this point is just, if you have information that you'd like to share about any one of these priority items and any bill activity, let's use this time to do that. I'll kick that off to update you on where item 1, the taxparency topic, is right now, because there was some action that took place in between our last meeting and this meeting. So in the House, this bill was referred to, it's House Bill 1890, and it was referred to the House Ways and Means Committee. So it received a hearing, I think it was about 2 weeks ago, and I went down and testified in support of that. And you know, it was really encouraging, all of the support that we had there from all parts of the state and organizations. We had 41s and 42s. We had the Chemical Manufacturers Association, Texas PTA, Texas Association of Realtors, TASA, TASB. I mean, just a multitude of organizations that don't commonly come together around the same issue in the same way. So that was very supportive. So that's the good news. The surprising news was that the manner in which our House sponsor, Representative Priglione, did a great job of laying out the bill and talking about its merits and purpose and so forth. And then I testified, and then he closed. So at the end of my testimony, it was just really shocking how unsupportive they were of this legislation, those particular House members. They just didn't want the phone calls from constituents that would result from this kind of transparency of their decision making, and they made that obvious. So it was really stunning to all of those supportive organizations that had attended and signed up in support of this legislation. So I think the representative did a great job in closing and pointing out the real merit and how so many organizations that don't come together were coming together around this. So we're kind of strategizing where we are on the House side. Right now we're focusing on the Senate side in the hopes of getting a hearing. It's assigned to the Finance Committee, so we're still working to advance that on that front. Is anything else?
Well, I was going to ask a question. Sorry, I can't talk. I'm thirsty. The amendment that we talked about with regard to the
Right.
the notice and such,
yeah.
Will that be considered, do you think?
So, okay, you'll see on your list here, there's House Bill 15, okay, by Dennis Bond, and he's the chair of that particular committee. He had actually talked to Christy Roan. His office had talked to her about incorporating this language into that bill.
Okay.
Okay, the day before, 2 days before this hearing. but given his lack of support for the actual bill that we were talking about.
He didn't want to attach to it.
It looks like there's a disconnect maybe between his priorities and the staff recommendations.
Okay.
So it could happen, and it would probably, that might be the vehicle.
So we can follow House Bill 15.
Right, we would need to, you know.
Okay. You know, I agree with you that I'm surprised that our lawmakers don't want to give transparency in taxation.
And just to be clear, our officials here were supportive.
Right, but
You know,
the
our
committee-
delegation has been
committee.
supportive
You're
of this,
right.
and we really appreciate that. It's surprising that the larger,
Right.
you know, folks, at least the folks on that panel
Right.
were not supportive.
Would it be helpful for us to reach out to that panel individually?
Really, what we need to do is to have their school districts reach out to them.
Okay. Okay.
And so Christy's been working on the merit of that versus pushing on the Senate side.
Mhm.
So Liz Morris was following up with her on, you know, that strategy.
Well, I want to thank you for taking a whole day to go down there and wait in line to testify on behalf of this, so thank you.
Thanks. I appreciate the board's support of this, you know, initiative. And I think we have our community's support too.
I think so.
I would just love it if every time one of them said transparency, we could kind of go ding.
Right.
Yes, we believe in that and transparency.
Well, we're not giving up.
Okay.
And, you know, we'll continue to advance this. And, you know, honestly, if they don't like it, we still have the ability to communicate with our taxpayers in a fashion of our choosing.
Exactly.
So I've already been investigating with Steve that opportunity to send out a full-page description that's a lot more in-depth than just a one-line item on the property tax statement.
Okay.
So we still have that ability. It's not free as this other mechanism would be, but if we believe strongly in communicating this information, we can do that.
Well, it shouldn't be overly surprising that they don't want to receive phone calls from constituents, considering this is the same body that legislated to put on tax bills. This is the responsibility of your local representatives. Call them, don't call us, and check your tax bill.
You mean your school districts?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It says that on.
It's on the property tax
on the
appraisal
property tax
form.
appraisal form.
They
So-
legislated that.
But you know, I am encouraged by the grassroots nature of this and all of the support that this movement has generated, and you know, can encourage us to continue working on the Senate side, work on the House side, even if it doesn't happen this time, to continue with this
Right.
work for the next session, because quite often it takes more than one session for something to really be put in place. But you know, this is important. This is important information, and it needs to be included. So we just need to keep your chin up, notwithstanding this first round. There's a long battle yet to go.
Well, and I'm thankful, and when I said our lawmakers, I'm going to clarify, I'm thankful for Senator Van Taylor for writing the sponsor bill in the Senate, and then Representative Leach and Representative Shaheen both have signed on,
And so did Laubenberg.
and Laubenberg. Okay,
So they've
good.
all been supportive, and we really
Awesome. That's
appreciate that.
wonderful.
So, you know, it takes a while sometimes you plant a seed and you continue watering it, so we're cultivating.
It's a marathon.
It's a marathon. Okay, next item, some good news on the property tax relief side. You know, that same day that I was there, I was asked by TASB and some other representatives if I would testify in support of two other bills that were up that day that we had, you know, taken a favorable position on, which was 390 and 486. They're duplicates, said the same thing, one's by Democrat, one's by a Republican. So I testified that gives us the ability on our tax rate to reduce it and raise it back up to a previously approved level. So if in 1 year if we could reduce the tax rate a penny or two this year, but we would need that next year in order to make that recapture tax payment, we would be able to help our taxpayers as much as we possibly could without holding another election. So this legislation has been out there. This is, I think, the third session. It just, you know, is just here again. So I've testified in support of both of those two. They moved out 486, which is the Republican version of that, so they approved that. So that is some good news. That is some property tax relief that we had been, you know.
Do we have a companion in the Senate for that one, 486?
That's a good question. It is that Senate Bill 1267?
Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
All right, so that's what I know about that. Assessment and accountability, that's kind of something that Dr. Bingley's been working on.
Yes, in the last meeting, I had updated everybody that both the House and the Senate, but more specifically House Bill 22, really did change from an accountability A to F model that was really driving a summative grade, which for particularly elementary and middle school was based almost exclusively on STAR testing, to something that became incredibly multi-metric in the House version, based on many quantitative and qualitative measures, and in fact would have 3 domains instead of 5, and have an individual grade for each domain as opposed to one. I went, and many folks did, testified, again, as President Bender suggested, a pretty wide variety of folks who said, well, that's a movement in a far better direction than what you had. And so I testified in support of that as well, with the caveat that I asked that as we move forward, that the commissioner, let's take the time to do this right. Doing it right is more important than doing it fast. And also that part of that time is reach out to folks in education and bring them to the table and talk about how do we include some of these measures in fine arts and survey instruments and a variety of things that we think give us good information. How do those come together? I think that it's going to be a very interesting conversation. You know, some of the same chambers have had bills that want to limit testing, but yet have an accountability model that's anchored on testing. And then they have said, okay, we need a far more multi-metric approach to this, yet we still want the simplicity of an A to F grading system. And those things are going to work against each other in the conversations that they're going to have. So it's really going to be interesting to see what emerges. We already do know that both the Senate and the House have really said that it had to change to incorporate more things than what was originally brought forward, and that was universally kind of blasted when it came out. So there's been real positive movement, and we just need to continue to keep trying to guide what we think is best. Ultimately, I'll go back to what we saw up on the screen. You know, our simple message is we want our kids to pursue excellence in wherever their interests and their passions take them. And we just think there should be accountability that connects to that thinking, as opposed to a very narrow state assessment. So that's what we're going to keep pushing for, and we've had some good movement in that area.
Okay, thank you. So the next topic has to do with pre-K funding. Both the House and Senate versions removed that from their budgets. And Steve, if you don't mind weighing in on that, could you describe what they're doing with that?
I'm not entirely sure. I think neither has approved the governor's grant program. Of course, we do still get half-day funding, but my understanding is that neither of the budgets, either the House or the Senate, would continue the grant funding that we had the last year. That was one of Governor Abbott's initiatives.
I think some of the thinking was using that money and just plowing it back into the basic allotment, so you can use it, you know, as you wish. instead of having to apply for it.
Right.
So that's where I think that is.
And is that at 136 million? Is that the number?
That's one of the numbers. I think the House and Senate had two different numbers at one point, and neither was approaching half of what the governor had asked for, but there's 3 or 4 numbers that have been bandied about.
Okay.
I mean, the last thing that I was going to throw out there has to do with just where the budget stands between the House and the Senate versions. Steve, if I could ask you again, would you mind just giving a couple of sentences on?
On the school finance part of it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the Senate has passed theirs out and I guess sent it over to the House, their entire appropriations bill. As far as public education, they, in a Texas Tribune report, apparently very candidly agreed that they had removed their funding at the expense of local property taxpayers who are having to pick up an increasing burden. So the Senate bill, I believe, was $1.8 billion less in state funding than the current biennium, and that despite the fact that there's another 150 or 60,000 students. So as far as the state's contribution, they decreased it despite inflation and despite increasing pupil population. So they didn't even fund enrollment growth. So they basically leave the formula intact. Both of them, on the other hand, the House side, if there are a couple of measures approved, would add, I believe it's roughly the same 1.8 billion back to the formula to increase the, basically it would be a somewhat new formula. They would take a lot of things that have been separate and combine them. For instance, we as a Chapter 140, as a Chapter 41 district, do not get any benefit from the transportation allotment, but now we would under the formula that the House has proposed. They would increase the basic allotment, I believe, by about $200. So obviously that would be better than the Senate's budget, which is reduced their contribution at the state level by almost $2 billion. The good thing with both of them, both the House and Senate bill do increase the Austin yield, which drives what we get on, we call it the golden pennies. It's 6 pennies out of our $1.17. Both of them in their bills have made provisions to increase that based on what Austin ISD's current wealth per student is. So districts, I guess any district at $1.04 would benefit for at least 4 of those pennies, and districts that have had a TRE would benefit on 6 of those pennies. So that's definitely a positive, and the fact that it's in both the House and Senate version gives us not assurance, but quite a bit of hope that it will remain in there after they negotiate their differences.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments?
I think, we've talked a lot, quite a bit in the past 6-7 months about the fact that the state's share of public education spending is declining at the expense of rising property values, and how that really doesn't seem right, the right way to approach things. It's not anything they're doing in the dark of night. One of the senators on the budget committee actually gleefully acknowledged that's what's happening in the media. So, again, I think this is like the transparency issue, is that there is a grassroots developing movement regarding this as well that started months and months ago. And so I think this is something that we should all watch and see if there's, a way to push this, because this is not, they are leveraging rising property values, which really does a disservice to districts like us that are paying in.
So just to be clear, what's happening is all of the increase in property value, all the increase in taxes that we are all paying because our property values went up, are going to the state, and they are using that amount to reduce their contribution to education, and they're using that money for other purposes.
So
That's what's
what you're, and so they're contributing 38%, whereas the state used to contribute 50%.
Just a few years ago.
It is disappointing because after that, that group that went around Texas, the committee and
The Property Tax Reform and Relief Committee.
there you go,
Senate.
that was the name. And it doesn't seem like they listen to the people. So I sure hope that they really go ahead and take the bull by the horns and take care of what is existing now, because it's not helpful. And it's certainly, yes, we have businesses coming to the state of Texas, but they're not going to keep on coming if our education system ends up failing our kids. So they need to, I would say it a different way, but I won't. They need to deal with it.
Okay. All right, thank you.
So, Missy, let me ask you this. So, both bills have been removed. They're gone?
No. So the one that I testified on in the House is pending in committee, so they took no action, all right? So they can either take no action and it dies, or they can take action and advance it or kill it, okay? The Senate hasn't even had a hearing on the bill yet, so there's still hope there to get a hearing and go through the same process there. The third way is as an amendment to some other bill. When it hits either the House or Senate floor, somebody else could tack on this language to one of those other bills. Okay? So there's still opportunity. And if all of that doesn't happen, we'll take the bull by the horns and communicate our message our way to our
With the tax
constituents.
statement.
With a tax statement or a separate letter or something.
Honestly, I think if y'all didn't wait too long, since I'm almost gone, that's why I'm saying it that way. If you would start trying to visit with different political groups and go to their meetings and ask if you could give a presentation, short presentation, I think that it would be very interesting what would happen, because I think they would get phone calls, and we have enough political savvy people that they know that it's not necessarily their legislators they need to call. It's the people on those committees that are holding up the process.
Yeah.
So that's just a suggestion.
Yeah. And my hope is that we'll put together our own communication, our own graphic, if you will, to communicate the message, and we'll make that available to all districts, 41s and 42s, and we'll use the same thing and make it easy for them to communicate the same message.
You should do both of the messages. The one that, doesn't let us right now, that we can't adjust our tax rate because of
Election
whatever.
environment.
Right. So I would say, here it is,
Yep.
2 major points you need to know.
So we'll be seeing some action.